This begins CD number 7.
I just wanted to say that the Quran that we're looking at all have a relationship to the subject. And the thing about the Quran is sometimes you don't see the relationship. And that's what takes what's called tadabbur, which is to reflect deeply about something. Because the Quran says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Don't they penetrate this Quran to its depth, penetrate it. Dubar is the end of something. So you try to, yatadabbar is to attempt to find the end. So don't you attempt to find, you're never going to get to the end because it's karam Allah. But the yatadabbur is to really reflect, to try to get to the other side. So it's all related. And one of the things about the Quran, there's a miracle of Quran, which is the miracle of tarabut, which is how the Quran is unified. One of the things about most books is that there's a superficial unity to most books. But if you begin to penetrate it and get into not the context, but what they call the subtext, the book begins to actually fall apart. And there's a whole school of literary criticism called deconstructionism, which is based on doing that, on deconstructing text and showing that in fact that there's not a unity to the theme and things like that. And the thing about the Quran is at the superficial level, it seems very ununified. It doesn't seem to have a theme that's holding it together. But as you begin to attempt to deconstruct or dive into it, what you see is that it's actually completely connected. And the analogy my favorite analogy for that is the stars. If you look up at the stars and have never looked at the night sky, it looks like it's a jumble of lights that has no connection. But if you begin to observe it every day, and you can't do it for one lifetime, it's taken millennia to even understand what we know today. And even what we know today is like somebody who threw a net out into the ocean and he pulls in all the fish and he determines that's what's in the ocean based on the size of his net. So human knowledge, what we know is like throwing a net into the ocean of knowledge, and we've pulled in a certain amount, but it's only what our net contains. And there's different people have different intellectual capacity. The Quran mentions about سَارَتِ الْأَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدْرِهَا, that when Allah revealed the water, it flowed in the valleys according to the measurement of the valley. And Ibn Abbas said it means that when Allah sent down the Quran, every human being will get a different amount of understanding from the Quran, like that valley in which the water flows. Some valleys can take a lot of water, and other valleys can't take very much. And human beings are like that, and there's a hikmah, there's a wisdom in that. So one of the things of this connection between the Quran is the connection between a chapter and then the chapter that follows it. And Ali Imran is what precedes An-Nisa. And of all the women, the highest woman, the one that was chosen above women, was the mother of Mary, alayha salam. And there's a strong opinion of many scholars, including Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, that she was actually from the Nabiyyin, that she actually received revelation. It's a strong opinion. The majority, Jamhur al-Ulama, the majority of scholars say that the prophets are from male only. But there's a strong opinion. It's not a weak opinion. It's not. And Ibn Hazm and others were absolutely convinced of that. So Ali Imran ends, you see the Maryam is the fruit of Ali Imran, which is that prophetic line. And so the prophetic line of Bani Israel ends with a woman, because she is the one that gives birth to Isa, who doesn't have a father. So he's actually comes through the prophetic line through a woman, which is interesting also from the Prophet ﷺ's family, which is through Fatima ﷺ. So you have a similar, the beginning of the prophetic offspring of the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, the prophetic line is through Fatima and not through a son. So Ali Imran is followed by An-Nisa. Now if you look Last week we looked at the beginning, which is all about taqwa and having awareness of your kinship bonds that are from the womb. And the womb is what? Woman, from one cognate, it's the man who has a womb. Because traditionally, Mensch in German, which is where we get men or man from, was a noun that applied to both male and female. It didn't have a gender-specific meaning. And so woman is also a Mensch, a man. So, and this is what insan is. Insan applies to both male and female. And then you get dhakar and untha are the two that come out of that, the male and the female. So if you look at the end of Al-Imran, which the end of chapters often are deeply related, in fact, according to Ibn Zubayr, always related to the beginnings of the next chapter. There's a thematic relationship between one that preceded and one that follows. If you look at the end of Ali Imran, in which this verse is the 200th verse of this chapter, and it is Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. It's, O you who believe, isbiru, have sabr, patience, wa sabiru, and have musabara. Both of these words, isbiru wa sabiru, are from sabara, yasbiru. And the root of this word, sabara, is to be patient or to bear something, because that's what patience is. Patience is bearing something and accepting it. And the command here is to be patient. If you believe, isbiru wa sabiru. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru. Have patience and have musabara. Musabara is patience with others. So the first is have patience with yourself, and then the second is have patience with others. Because all relationships in the world are only of two kinds: relationships with yourself and relationships with others. That's it. Now, the idea of a relationship between yourself and between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's two ways you can look at that. One of them is that in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, and nothing was with Him, and He continues to remain as He was. In other words, your contingent existence in relationship to Allah is cancelled out. And that's one of the meanings of La ilaha illallah. That there's no reality except Allah. Which is not to say this is Allah. It's to say that this is really, it's not real. Because Allah is the only haqq. But He created this with the haqq. So what that means is it has contingent reality. So we're not like Hindus that say that this is an illusion, although there is an illusory aspect to the world. There's an element in the world that is, it's an illusion. And we know that now. I mean, you can go into, they can put you in a virtual game now, and you'll think that what's happening to you is happening. In other words, you can be, they'll fly you up in a plane, or you can be on a racetrack driving in a car, and your emotions, your adrenals, and all of your emotions are going to be the same as if it was this. Right? That's an analogy, in a sense, for what's happening here. Because in the end, most of what's happening, they're mental formations that we set up in our mind. And you can get so caught up in that you lose sight that it's a virtual reality. That this is a type of virtual reality. But it does have reality in that it exists by Allah. It's contingently existent. And so your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a real one. It's not unreal, nor is it an illusion. But your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has both elements. In other words, it has the aspect of sabr and musabara. It has both elements. So this is in relation to how we are in the world. All right? And in the world, it's ultimately going to be you and those things that Allah has given you taklif to do. and then you and those people that you're going to interact with. Concerning those things with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, isbiru, the first and foremost is knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That coming to know Allah is a process. You don't get an illumination. There's a process of coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It begins with infancy, and as you move on and get older, it continues. So initially, a child, when it comes into the world, it's in this state of unity. It hasn't differentiated yet, and then it begins to move into differentiation. And during that process, the parents are entrusted with giving that child guidance. In other words, making the experience of coming into the world of differentiation meaningful and reminding them of where they came from. You have to remind the child where they came from. So that becomes an obligation. So the process of coming to know Allah is taklif. It's actually, we are responsible. فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah. So that's a taklif that Allah has given you, and you have to be patient with that process. All right? And there's degrees of that, of knowledge of Allah. The people that know, the Prophet said, أَنَا أَخْشَاكُمْ لِلَّهِ. I have more awe of Allah than any of you. And the reason for that is because أَنَا أَعْلَمُكُمْ بِاللَّهِ. I know Allah better than any of you. وَإِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَا. The people who have real awe are the people who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the more you know, the more awe you obtain. And so that is sabr, because you can increase in awareness of Allah. It's not like where you're at now is where you have to be for your entire life. In fact, it shouldn't be. There should be an increase. And you're going to go through, just like planets, they have retrograde motion. Right, in their orbit around the sun, you'll see a planet. It's not doing it in reality, but it's how we experience it. You'll see the planet moving with the rest of the stars, and then for a period of time it starts going retrograde, which in old cosmologies they thought it was a bad time. That's the way the nafs is. You can be in this orbit of divine obedience, but then you go into this retrograde motion, which is ma'asiyah. It's disobedience. And those things, there's a wisdom in that, and there's also lessons to be learned from it, but it's something that's to be struggled with. It's not something that you submit to, you struggle with it. So he says, isbiru, so that's sabr ala ma'rifah of Allah. And then the prophets, of what nubuwwah is, coming to know who the prophets were, why they came. The next is knowing adl, which is you have to learn adl. And adl has two aspects. It has justice with yourself and justice with others. But learning that is a process. You have to come to understand what justice is to the best of our ability, because we're finite. And then how to apply that towards ourselves by not oppressing, because oppression is the opposite of adl. Dhulm is the opposite of adl. And what oppression is وَضَعُ شَيْءٍ فِي غَيْرِ مَحَلِّهِ, putting something where it does not belong. If you put your limbs where they don't belong, it's called disobedience, ma'asiyah, and you have oppressed. If you take somebody's wealth and misappropriate it, you've put something that does not belong to you where it does not belong, that's oppression to another. If you steal something, it's putting it where it doesn't belong, because you took it out of its place and put it in a place it didn't belong, which was your own pocket. So that is the essence of what oppression is. And learning what is halal, what is haram, and then struggling with that also. And then also the idea of ma'ad, eschatology, which is what happens after death. There's a patience in learning that, right? You have to learn what happens after life. And there's a process, and we're supposed to know that. You should know, about ba'ath and resurrection, and then the hashar, the nashar, the mawqif, the hisab, the mizan, the sirat, the hawd. I mean, all these things are part of aqeedah, and that's part of what Allah is saying is to come to know, is understanding those things. And then you move to the sabr of the ada al-fara'id, which is fulfilling those obligations. So you've learned the adl, and part of the adl is knowing, the justice is knowing why you were created. We can look at, in the Islamic tradition, and every system of philosophy or religion deals with 5 essential questions, and Islam deals with these essential questions. The first one is the cosmological question. Where did all this come from? That's a question that Islam deals with. Where did all this come from? These are the 5 big questions. There's a lot of little questions in the world, and a lot of people spend their lives in those little questions, and they never get to the big ones. But the big ones are always confronting them, and there's only 5 basic ones. That's it. And if you learn those 5 and occupy your life with those 5, then you've done yourself a service, because they're really the only ones of worth or weight. So the first one is that cosmological question. Where did this come from? And the Quran gives an answer. إِن سَأَلْتُهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهُ. If you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they will respond, Allah. So all of this, we believe, came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is a question of ultimate concern. Where did this come from? The next question is what they call the eschatological question, which is, how do we know anything? Right? In other words, what is knowledge, and how is knowledge obtained? And the Quran answers that question again in the beginning of the Quran. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read in the name of your Lord who created. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم الإنسان بالقلم علمه ما لم يعلم. Allah is the one that taught the human being. And he also said, علمه البيان. How do we know things? We know things through language. The difference between the human and other creatures is that humans know language. Now, one of the things about language, Chomsky has what he calls the LAD, the language acquisition device, which he's saying that language is inherently programmed in the human being. In other words, it's there. Now, if you look at what a child learns in the first few years of life, by the time it's 2.5 or 3, it's speaking formulated sentences. Those sentences are much more complicated and difficult than basic mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4. To say, I want to go out and ride my bike, that is much more complicated than 2 + 2 = 4. And yet, a child of 3 can say the second and cannot say the first. It can't understand it. So where did its ability to acquire language come from? عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. He imprinted, because allama means to imprint something. And that's why the allama bil-qalam, he taught with a pen. The original pens were into clay tablets. That's why the earliest tablets that we have, the earliest writing, is clay that has these imprints. That's what the alama means. Allama means to imprint something. And so the human being has certain things imprinted in him that begin to emerge. And throughout your life, at different stages of your life, you're designed to be ready for something at certain stages. You're not ready for geometry at the age of 7. You can't understand it. I mean, there's absolute geniuses, which is, like the Arabs say, الشاذ يحفظ ولا يقاس عليه. Somebody who's unusual or out of the ordinary is taken into consideration, but not used as a standard to assess other things. So you're not ready for certain concepts. Certainly the concept of death, you cannot understand that concept in any real deep level until you begin to move into the age of tamyiz. So this idea of eschatology, with how we know things, and the Quran tells us that. And then there are 2 ways in which we know things. We know things through direct intuition, which is called daruri, right? And then we know things through discursive thought, which is called nadari. In other words, the ability to reflect on things. So things that we know intuitively is that this is greater than this. Even a child knows that. How do we know that? We don't really, that's a difficult one to get to, of why we know that type of knowledge. But the fact that we know it, it's intuitive. So there are things we know intuitively, and then there are things we learn. We have to learn. Now, one of the other things, this divides into 2 types of knowledge again, which is revelation and then inspired knowledge. Revelation is what prophets are given, that we do not have access to except a small portion, which is 1/46. There's different hadiths about that, but 1/46 of prophecy is a true dream, which every human being, including irrespective of religion or anything, every human being has access to that. And one of the reasons for that is to let people know the nature of revelation. So you can have a dream that actually comes true. And many, many people have had this. There's books written on this subject, clairvoyant dreams. So that is a portion of prophecy that only indicates the nature of prophecy, that it is the ability to know something that you have no material means to know it. Right? It's neither intuitive nor is it discursive. You can't learn it, you can't acquire it, nor do you know it intuitively. It's given. It's a knowledge that is given, and that is given to the prophets. So that is the question of how we know things. And then you have the ontological question, which is, who am I? Who am I? I mean, that's a question. Who am I? And the Quran answers that question, who you are. The Quran answers it by telling you that you are a slave of Allah. You're abd, right? You are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is who you are. And the Quran also tells you that you're dependent. Because a lot of people, even though it's as obvious as the sun on a midday morning, many people are actually not aware that they are dependent creatures. It's a fascinating delusion that many human beings actually have. They are not aware that they're dependent. And so who you are is you are in time, in space, right? You're an in time and in space creature, so you're dependent on time, space. And then you're a biological creature, which means you have the 5 biological functions, one of them being ingestion and the other excretion, right? So you ingest and you have to excrete, so that you're dependent on food, you're dependent on the processing of food, and then on the elimination of what is separated from that food. So all those are indicative of your state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are faqir, you're abd. So you're a servant and you're dependent. The nature of servitude is dependence, right? Because the servant is dependent on the master. So that is who you are. And then the next question is what they call the soteriological question, which is, what is my purpose in life? Why am I here? And that question again is answered in the Quran. There are 3 reasons for your existence according to the Quran. The Quran says that He created you from the world, from the earth, min al-ard, wasta'marakum fiha. Right? And then He placed you in the earth in order for imara. Imara is to cultivate. Umran is cultivation or civilization. The imara is the opposite of ifsad. So for instance, if you go to Las Vegas, in Arabic you can say amaruha, they cultivate it. But in reality, the Quranic perspective, Las Vegas is not imara. It's not cultivating. It's doing the opposite. Because the thing is, the Arabs say, whoever cultivates thorns will not harvest grapes. Right? The purpose of cultivation, because it comes from an agricultural metaphor, is something that's going to benefit you. And that is why tobacco cultivation is not imara. Nor is the cultivation of grapes for wine imara. But if you were cultivating grapes for food, it is imara. So when you look at this idea of cultivation, you have to look at what is the aim that the action is derived from. And if the aim is an aim that serves the best interests of humanity, that is imara. If it serves the worst, if it serves in any way to harm the human being, then it's not imara. So Allah created you for imara, which is to cultivate the earth for beneficial purposes. That includes agriculture, engineering, medicine, building of schools, building of orphanages. All of these things is imara, setting up political structures. Everything that will benefit the human being is imara. And that is preceded, according to the Quran, by ithara, which is actually to take from the earth what you need to do that. So you have the aims and objectives, right? And you have the means to do that. The means are taken from ithara, and the aims and objectives will indicate whether or not it's cultivation or not. So that is a big question. Why are you here? Imara. The second reason is istikhlaf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He has يَسْتَخْلِفُكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَلْيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ, that He has made you khulafa in the earth, and then He watches how you behave, what you do. So the idea of khilafa, and this has two elements. One of them is the idea that you are here for perpetuity. In other words, the people that were here before you were here in order for you to come next. So that's an aspect of the istikhlaf, that those people that were here before you, they were here in order for you to come here. That's one of their reasons for being, for existing, so that you can exist. So each generation is a link in the previous generation and for the following generation. So you are a link, and that link is the link of istikhlaf. So from one end, you are the khalaf of these people, and from another end, you're the salaf. You're leaving behind khalaf. All right? So that is one of the reasons why Allah placed us in the earth, for this linkage. That's one aspect of khilafah. The second aspect is once you realize you're a link, what does that necessitate in your perspective? Responsibility. In other words, not only do you have a responsibility for those that went before you to sustain what they left behind for you. Because think about this. If each generation had to start over and build political institutions, build roads, build infrastructure, you would spend your entire life engaged in that project. But you don't have to do that, because it was already done for you. So you have a gratitude for the people that went before you, and you feel a responsibility for those who come after you. And that is khilafah. It's a responsibility that you have to maintain the earth. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تفسد الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Don't corrupt the earth after it was rectified for you. It was rectified for you by Allah initially by creating this extraordinary globe that has a perfect admixture of gases that enable us to survive, that is a perfect distance from the sun, that enables everything on the earth to survive, that has this extraordinary 23.5 degree tilt so that you have 4 seasons that enable life to exist. He set up all of these things, and then He gave you all of this extraordinary, the canopy above you in order to orient yourself, in order to guide yourself in your travels. He created the earth a firash according to the Quran, which is like a bed. It's neither hard, neither too hard nor too soft. In other words, it's in between the two, so you can dig the earth, but the earth is not like sand so that you can't benefit from it. So you can build foundations that will actually last. Because if this was pure marble, you couldn't set up a house on marble. It would be almost impossible. So all of this He did, and then said, don't mess it up. Now there's another aspect of that, is that the previous generation did all of this work. Don't destroy what they did. You can rectify things, because every generation is going to do some things right and some things wrong. So you can rectify what they might have done wrong, but don't think it's all wrong. It's not. I mean, no country that has any type of infrastructure is all wrong. It doesn't matter what country it is. And what happens is, now you look at a place like Afghanistan, where the infrastructure is completely destroyed, and look at the state of the people. And don't think you can just take one government out and fill it with another government with any ease. I mean, these are really difficult situations. So the point is that if you've got a situation, it might not be the best of all possible wars. It wasn't meant to be the best, because that's the nature of being on the earth. But don't think that you can just easily create a revolution and you're going to set things right. Because it took a great deal of time and effort to set up what exists. And so changing that is transformative instead of revolutionary, right? Transformation is better change than revolutionary change, because revolutionary change disrupts. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ did not disrupt the existing social order. If you look at his seerah, he did not disrupt the existing social order. I mean, even when he went into Mecca, he still made Abu Sufyan the Sayyid of his people. Man dakhala bayta Abi Sufyan fahuwa amin. He made him the Sayyid. He didn't say, okay, now why? Because in al-muluk idha dakhalu qaryatan ja'alu a'izzata ahliha adillah. Right? It's kings that when they come into cities, they turn it all upside down. Right? Conquering kings are the ones that disrupt everything, not prophets. Prophets just, they rectify. They put it in perspective. So the idea of why we're here is istikhlaf. That's one of the main reasons. This idea of not only that you are a link, but also that as a link, you have to maintain the link of the past by not severing that and throwing off the past, which is the mistakes of modernity. One of the big mistakes of modernity is severing the link of the past and believing that what we have today is better than anything that went before us. And the other mistake is severing the link of the future by not protecting what you've been given as a sacred trust, the biosphere, the animal kingdom, the genetic pool. I mean, these are all sacred trusts that you've been given. Don't muck this up, because it took a great deal of effort to get where it is. Not on Allah's part, it took no effort whatsoever, but even through His sunan it did. Because Allah's sunan is eons of work. I mean, the universe took eons to get to where it is. So that is the question of, the third is for ibadah, which is worship. Now, the thing about ibadah is that ibadah permeates all three purposes. Imara, which is cultivation, istikhlaf, which is perpetuity and responsibility, and then ibadah. And the ibadah has two aspects. The first is the ibadah that involves your own self, and then the second is the ibadah that involves others. All right. So in relation to the ibadah that involves yourself, that is learning the fara'il and the mandubat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you to do. And there's a reason for doing that. He did not give this to you لِيَجْعَلَ عَلَيْكُم مِّنْ حَرَجٍ. He didn't do this in order to make things hard for you, وَلَكِنْ لِيُطَهِّرُكُم, but in order for tahara, to purify you. So the whole purpose of everything that Allah has given us is not to make it difficult. It's not for haraj. Don't think that it's for difficulty that He told you to get up for Fajr, that He told you to pray. No, this is to purify you, to set you straight. Because you have an obligation to be upright. Because of the past and because of the future. You have an obligation of Khalifa. And in order to be Khalifa, in order to be a Caliph, a Vice Regent, you have to be up for the challenge. If you're not up for the challenge, you can't do it. Because if those before you were straight, then you are like their shadow, and you'll be straight. Right? And if those who come after you, right, if you're straight, then you're like their shadow. Right. But if the shadow, if the object is crooked, then the shadow by necessity is crooked, because what follows, do you see? That's what happens. So with the child, if you're crooked, the child is going to be crooked. Right? With rare exception. And that's why you have an obligation. Because children, you cannot say to children, do as I say, but don't do as I do. Doesn't work. So the idea of ibadah is to know what you've been told to know, and then to the mu'amalat, how you deal with others. Because there is a haqq of Allah in your dealings with yourself and with others. This is the haqq of Allah. Now, the whole point of this is siyasa. And siyasa is, I mean, it's translated in modern Arabic as politics. But it's not. It's a bad translation, even though that is the equivalent word in English. Siyasa is a much deeper word, because siyasa comes from a word which is to train a horse, right? And if you watch a horse trained, it's an amazing process to take a wild horse and train. And there's two ways to do it. You can do it with violence, which is the way it's usually done, and you can do it with gentleness. There's a complete two different methods of training horses. And I know this experientially because my grandfather was a horse trainer. He kept horses as a hobby. And I remember watching him do the gentle whip, just getting it used to going around in circles. And then when he saddled it, just slowly first, just putting the saddle on, not riding it, just getting it used to the idea of a saddle. Very slow process. And that is the siyasa of the self, because the self is like a horse. And then there's the siyasa with others. And this is absolutely essential because now we're moving into the musabara. The final question, that's the big one, right, is the eschatological question. فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where are you going? Where are you going? Where's all this what's all this leading to? Because we're all going to die. At this stage in life, you should have realized that by now. That you're a temporal creature and you're going to die. And that is a big question, is the eschatological question. Does it end with death or does it go on? And if it goes on, what goes on? And are we responsible? There's a lot of questions involved in that. So that's the question of ma'ad. And that's the question of the Quran. فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? And Allah answers the question. إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. You're returning to Allah. يَبْعَثُكُمْ. He raises you up. Right? يُحَاسِبُكُمْ. He'll take you into account. حَاسِبُ قَبْلَ أَن تُحَاسِبُ. Take yourself to account before you're taken to account. Right? Don't wait till the tax people come. You should have an accountant doing all that stuff to make sure it's all right. Because if you wait until the tax man comes and you've done no accounting, it's off to jail. Or you might just get off with a fine. Right? But you're going to be punished. So, aminu wasbiru wasabiru. And then, so the musabara is how you, one thing about siyasa that I want to mention, which is important in relation to the male-female relationship. If you cannot politic yourself, you in no way can do it to others. It just doesn't work. So that is important to learn. And there are many verses in the Quran about that. أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ? Do you command others to righteousness and you forget about your own souls? Right? It doesn't work. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطَوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Don't follow the خطوات of shaitan. وَمَنْ يَتَّبِعْ خُطَوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ. If you follow the path of shaitan, by nature, you will command to what's wrong. Do you see? In other words, if you've surrendered to your lower self, then you're going to be telling other people to do that as well. When I went to Las Vegas to talk to the Muslim community, when you came into the airport, it said, give in to temptations. There was a big sign on that literally, wallahi, that's what it said. Now, if you translate that into Arabic, aslim lil mughriyat, or aslim lil shahawat. It's saying submit to temptation. Now, who says that? And there's only one creature out there that's his message. And it's interesting because, you know, shaitan is the great imitator. He loves to imitate. You know, Allah says in the Quran that his throne is on water, so shaitan put his throne on the ocean. And when we were there, the thing about Las Vegas, it looks just like the Hijaz. It really does. It looks exact. You think you're in Saudi Arabia. And it's his Mecca. It's like that's where you go. That's the Hajj that people make. They go there. And I'm sure he's like this year they had 2 million Hajis in Mecca. He's like, this year they had, 3 million people visited Las Vegas. And what do they do there? It's amazing. I mean, they're in a state of ibadah. That's deep ibadah. And you can see them there. The Quran says, what are these images that you're so assiduously devoted to? Right? The tamathil, antum aakifun alayha. I mean, what are these things? I mean, these are idols. They can't stop. And that's the thing about it. They cannot stop. Right? They're in there and and selling their wedding rings and doing all these things. So that's the other deen. I mean, and it's empty. That's the thing. You look at the faces, they don't look, on Hajj, it's amazing to see those faces of people on Hajj. because they're in ibadah. And people, you get people, 60,000 people here together in a rock concert or something like that, and they have to have massive amounts of police. They always have fights that break out. People often get killed. Terrible things happen. Right? At Hajj, it's a miracle. I mean, they're all there right now. Right? They're all there. It's a miracle. They all come together, and people, if somebody gets angry, everybody's like, why do they remember that then? Because that happens here and people forget that. But on Hajj, they remember it. And that's a gift of being in a state of dhikr. So the idea of rectifying yourself, you cannot be a ra'i, a shepherd, if you're a wolf. I mean, you have to rectify yourself. And Allah says, عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Take care of your own souls. لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ مَنْ ضَلَّ إِذَا اهْتَدَيْتُمْ. Because those who have gone astray aren't going to harm you if you're guided. So if you're all worried about the rest of the world and you're not right with yourself, you're in trouble. Whereas if you're right with yourself, then you can genuinely worry about the rest of the world. And even the rest of the world is not in reality going to harm you. Especially the women. And something that a Muslim scholar from England, I visited him, and his wife said an amazing thing. We were talking about just the state of the world. And she said, I think Allah has been so generous to women because it's not our business. It's the men's business. And they're the ones that are going to be taken into account for all that, not us. Because look at that mess out there. She said, all we have to worry about is this little house that we're in. If we take care of that, we're fine. Whereas that thing out there, that's the men's responsibility. And she said, and the truth is, if these women had any brains at all, they wouldn't want to go out there. It's a completely insane idea to want to go out there. But men are told to go out there, even though most men don't want to do it either. Right? And the ones that do are mucking it up because they're out there for the wrong reasons. Right? So taking care of your own souls, right, is really important. And Sayyidina Umar, he said, تَفَقَّهُ قَبْلَ أَن تَسَوَّدُوا. Learn before you get into positions of responsibility. Because you won't know what to do. If you don't have competent people, you have to know what your competencies are, your core competencies, like they say in corporate America. Know what you can do, and then do it. And if you can't do it, and you need to do something that involves something like that, you have to go out and learn it. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَصَابِرُوا, which is musabara. This is the relationship between other people. And this relationship has different aspects. Because if you look, ultimately, your relationship with others will entail certain things. One of them, and this is all about tahammul al-mashaq, because that's what musabara is the ability to bear difficulty, which is part of what life is about. So the first is the difficulty of your own family, is the ability to have musabara with your wife, with your husband, with your children. Because that's your most immediate relationship with the other. And if that relationship is not sound, don't think your relationships out there are going to be sound. Because if you're being nice to people outside, and you're being cruel to your family, I mean, that's like a petty third world tyrant. When they go outside of their country, they're nice because they don't have any power. Right? But when they're inside their country, they behave like dictators. That's the way all these petty dictators are. They're terrible with their own people, but then outside they're trying to have all these nice relationships because they're worried about getting overthrown and things like that. So that's the way a tyrant is inside the house. So that musabara is first with your family, and then with your relatives, aqarib, dealing with the fact that you're going to have difficulties with your family. And then with your jiran, your neighbors. And again, it extends out further and further. Now the thing about the musabara, so that's one level of musabara. Then there's also the musabara of dealing with the ibadah, mu'amalat related to other people. So when you transact with people, there's a knowledge that when you go into the marketplace, you need to have patience. If you don't have patience, you're going to end up doing things that you regret. So being patient with other people in that, sabiru with other people in those things. Now all of musabara deals with things that we don't like, makarih. And it comes from the bad akhlaq of other people, the bad character that they show you, their treachery, all of these things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about this, He says, وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى, that you should forgive and condone and pardon is closer to taqwa. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, turn away from ignorant people. وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ, be patient about what they say. وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا, and leave them in a good way, not in a way that cuts it off, in a good way. And if you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, nobody in history that I know of, nobody had, other than prophets, but the Prophet ﷺ, the way he dealt with people was always with musabara. You'll never find him losing his temper. You'll never find him taking revenge. Even the woman that poisoned him, he didn't take revenge from her. I mean, he was always forgiving. And that's what he taught. Because the Quran says, الَّذِينَ يَتَّبِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ. Those who listen to what's being said from the Quran and they follow the best of it. Because the Quran has hasan and ahsan. It has good and it has better. The good is that you follow the hudud of Allah. And so the good of the Quran is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But immediately after that, what does He say? But to forgive is better. So that's the best. So Allah gives you the permission to take your haqq, but it's better to give up your haqq. And the best of people are the ones that follow the better way, the higher road. Both roads will get you to the same goal, which is the pleasure of Allah, but one gets you there much quicker. And one gets you to a higher station when you arrive because it's a higher road. So this idea of musabara is the idea of really bearing the difficulties of the world. And also this relates, part of sabr, and I didn't go into this, but part of sabr is the patience with calamities and difficulties. So that's part of sabr between you and your own soul, is dealing with calamity. This one has to do with calamities with others, that you patient and bear that and do that. And from this also is ithar, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. They prefer others to themselves even if they had need. So this is also musabara, which is where you actually prefer others to your own needs. All right? And the Ansar were the epitome of that because Allah mentions them. يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ. They love those who migrate to them. They preferred them over their own souls. They were willing to give what they had to them. That's another aspect of musabara. And then also amr bin ma'ruf and nahi an al-munkar, because if you command good and forbid evil, difficult things happen to you. So being patient, musabara with that. وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا أَصَابَكَ. Allah command, Luqman says, وَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَانْهَى عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ, that to command to good and to forbid evil. And then he says to his son, and be patient about what afflicts you from other people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells that. So, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اصْبِرُوا وَصَابِرُوا وَرَابِطُوا. And then there's another aspect to this, which is there are three things that prevent you from doing this. The sabr and the musabara. Only three things. The first is your shahawat, passion. You see, sleep is a shahwa. So getting up for fajr, if you're so engaged in that shahwa of sleep, that shahwa will override. Do you see? So that's a shahwa. Zina is from the shahwa of sexual pleasure. So if somebody allows that to overcome them, they actually go and do haram. Right? And then, so those are patient. Also patience. So patience with ibadah and patience in doing worship of Allah and patience in not doing wrongs. That's related to this shahwa. The sabr ala nafs has to do with shahwa. Right? And then the next thing that will prevent this is, and Allah says, وَمَنْ نَهَى نَفْسَ عَنْ هَوَاهَا. the one who prevents his soul from its desire, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, they get paradise. That's their abode. So that's the reason to do it. So you have that hawa, and then ghadab. The next one is ghadab. See, anger, which is a deep emotion. And Muslims, we really, I think this is one of our biggest, because we have reason to be angry. Muslims have reason to be angry. Anyone that says Muslims don't have a reason to be angry, we do. There's a lot of reasons for Muslims to be angry. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us of anger. The Prophet ﷺ said, when the man said, what should I do? He said, La taghdab, don't get angry. He said, Awsini, give me advice. In other words, what kind of advice is that? Give me real advice. La taghdab, don't get angry. Awsini, give me real advice. La taghdab, 3 times. Don't get angry. Because anger, and differentiating between indignation, which is anger for the sake of Allah, and wrath, which is anger for the self. Right? Our anger tends to be wrath. It's for ourselves. It's not for Allah. I mean, we would like to delude ourselves that it's for Allah. The Prophet ﷺ had indignation. He did not have wrath. He was upset about wrongs. And there are things to get upset about out there, but how you go about that in order to change them. If you allow your anger to overcome you, your wrath to overcome you, 2 things happen. One, you'll consume yourself in that anger and become worse than the thing that you're angry at. And a good example of that is Muslims that begin to use violence against those who are violent to them in ways that are unacceptable. I mean, defense is one thing, but killing innocent people, things like that, that comes out of wrath. That is wrath. Because the end is justified, the means is justified by the end, which is not our philosophy. It's an alien philosophy. So this idea of rabitu is to be vigilant about shahwa, about ghadab, and the third one is hirs, which is it's covetousness. You cannot prefer others if you're holding on to what you have. You can't give sadaqah if you have this covetousness. Now, each one of these relate to a center in the human being, which is the center we've been commanded to control. The first is the quwwa shahwaniyah, which is the concupiscent soul. The soul that's related to shahwa. And the second is the quwwa al-ghadabiyya, which is the irascible soul. And the third is the quwwa al-aqliyya, which is the rational soul. In the first soul, we're commanded to guard against that. The second soul, the emotions. And then the third soul is understanding things as they are. And hirs, covetousness, comes from a misunderstanding of the nature of the world. You want to hold on to things because, one, you think that it's permanent. And it's not. And 2, because you don't realize by letting go, you open up for a flow to receive more. You see, if you're holding on to something and not letting go. And then finally, after Allah says, وَرَابِطُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. In other words, why are you doing all this? Why are you doing all this? Why are you doing this sabr, musabara, and murabata? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do it for the sake of God. Don't do it for any other reason. وَاتَّقُوا. And there's 2 reasons to do that. وَاتَّقُوا, guard yourself from incurring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's displeasure. And then لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that in order that you might have success. So the success is the akhirah, the jannah, the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all those verses, that's one ayah of the Quran. Right? Ali Imran. And that's extraordinary because the entire surah is summed up. If you read the surah, it's all summed up in that final ayah.
This completes CD number 7.